issues that I've raised will be part of the discussion.
Okay. Okay then.
Yep.
Right. Right, we have our first evidence session then from the Allied Irish Bank and First Trust Bank officials, the Finance Union. And just refer members then to tab 4, the briefing paper that they've given us. And I think that they're also going to be providing a PowerPoint presentation as well. So, very welcome. We have Larry Broderick, the General Secretary of the IBOA, Steve Tweed, Senior Industrial Relations Official of the IBOA, Sharon McCauley, First Trust Bank staff member, Robin Dale, First Trust Bank staff member as well with us. So I don't know, you want to give the presentation, the overhead presentation first then, or?
Yes, please.
Is that okay? And then we'll go into questions,
yes,
is that okay?
That's fair. Firstly, could I just say, Chairman and members of the committee, it's a great privilege and a very much welcomed opportunity to have this unique opportunity just to talk to you a bit about the sale of First Trust Bank, and in particular the impact it's going to have on our members and the Northern Ireland economy, and in relation to customers and small and medium enterprises throughout Northern Ireland. Our focus today is to focus from our point of view in relation to the key issues and to give you some general background. Just to let you know, IBOA, the Finance Union, represents the majority of staff working in mainstream banking in Northern Ireland. We represent staff in First Trust Bank, Northern Bank, Bank of Ireland and Ulster Bank. As well, we represent the same staff in the Republic of Ireland, and also we represent staff in AIB and Bank of Ireland in Great Britain. We have offices here in Belfast, and also we have offices in Dublin. From the point of view of this presentation, we just want to give you a brief outline in terms of what First Trust is about, the issues that we're faced with, and how maybe you might be able to support us. First Trust Bank is a subsidiary of AIB Group, and it was being created following the acquisition of TSB Northern Ireland by AIB in 1991. As you would be aware, TSB Northern Ireland has been operating here in the Northern Ireland economy for many, many years prior to that, as has AIB. It's part of the AIB UK's division since 1996, whereas along with AIB GB, both are now up for sale. So the board of AIB has made a decision because of significant losses in the Republic of Ireland to sell profitable entities here in Northern Ireland and in GB. AIB UK has a separate board. Our understanding is the UK board, or the representatives on that board from Northern Ireland, were not consulted in advance and have had no role to play in relation to that particular decision. And that's why we strongly feel for this committee to take on board that Northern Ireland interests has not been taken on board at all, both in terms of the economy, both in terms of consumers, and in particular where our interest is obviously as well in relation to the staff. There's a very strong head office support here in Belfast, and it provides support functions for up to 48 branches in Northern Ireland. And what makes First Trust Bank unique is that head office support also supports businesses in the Republic of Ireland. It also supports businesses in Great Britain. So there's significant issues there which are a bit unique. And in terms of staff numbers, we're talking about 1,500 staff in total is involved in relation to this. So it's a very, very significant group of staff that are going to be impacted by virtue of where we're at here in terms of this particular decision. If you look at the scope, and it's important that you, as a finance committee, just get a sense of what First Trust is about here in Northern Ireland. First of all, it deals with personal customers, very strong community-based bank. It's very integrated in the community, and particularly in relation to small and medium-sized enterprises. It involves itself in the corporate sector. It also involves itself in specialist services and mortgages, invoice discounting and asset finance. And it also provides independent financial services that sales and advice in a regulated way. So all in all, from the point of view of this particular committee, it is an important part of the market. In terms of the market in Northern Ireland and banking, it represents probably 20%. In some areas it's actually bigger than that. So the impact of any decision, and what we're basically here to talk about, the impact of a decision, will have a significant impact on the Northern Ireland economy. It is also very important that it's a sound business. If you look in general terms, in 2008, it made a net profit of 33 million. And if you look again in terms of 2009, its net loss was 86 million, but an underlying profit of 119 million, offset by 200 million provision for impaired property loans. And just to say to this committee that in the context of AIB Group, the Irish government in the Republic of Ireland have given a commitment that AIB and Bank of Ireland, as the larger financial services groups in the Republic of Ireland will not be allowed foreclosed, will not be allowed closed down, and the government will actually intervene to retain that as businesses because of the core need in the Republic of Ireland. And we would argue that the Irish government, who will ultimately own either a significant minority share or a majority share, needs to recognise that for the Northern Ireland economy, what happens with this bank, which to some extent is within their gift, will have an implication here in Northern Ireland. And that's a key message, I say, to the members of this committee, taking on board your own role in relation to focus on Northern Ireland. Now, we argue very strongly, if you look at a bank of this nature, that it's not just about money and not just about loans. It's very strongly embedded in the commercial, sporting and academic and cultural life in Northern Ireland. It promotes enterprise and community development right across the board and works very strongly with the Chambers of Commerce in terms of interaction on various levels. It's major sponsorship for rugby and for GAA, and it's very much involved in student and graduate awards in the University of Ulster. And it's also very significant in terms of sports and theatre and developments. And the point we make to the committee is that it's not just a bank. Our members on a daily basis are interacting with community groups on an ongoing basis, and that's important for us. In relation to the staff, there's 1,500 staff across Northern Ireland, 48 branches, big head office. Widely recognised that their terms and conditions are good. I mean, we have a reasonable relationship as an employer. It pays good pensions, good pay, good terms and conditions of employment. So there's going to be a further impact in terms of this change, Chair, in terms of Northern Ireland, because these individuals have families and the broader community will be dependent. And with this change, if it goes in a particular direction, and if there's thousands of jobs lost as a result of it, both directly and indirectly, it will have a significant impact here, indeed greater than some of the bigger employment closures here in Northern Ireland. Equally, from our point of view, the workforce is a very, very committed workforce. Our ethos is a trade union. We're strong, we're robust, but we're also fair, and we recognise the commercial realities. And our members have worked hard, even in relation to the present climate, to recognise that we've had to make sacrifices. Our members have had to change radically their pension scheme. Our members have to look at salary sacrifice, pay freezes, all about recognising that in the context of the changing banking environment, they have to make a contribution. But it's very disheartening, and people are very, very angry when a board in Dublin, without consultation with anybody in Northern Ireland, is focused on just selling them off and not really being interested either in the Northern Ireland economy or indeed the staff that work in a very positive and constructive way. Now, just to give you some background, because it is kind of complex in terms of what's involved here, how did we get to this place? Well, to be very clear about it, AIB Group was one of the most successful banks in Europe. The profit per employee, for example, in 2007 was one of the highest right across Europe. So we're looking at a very strong, profitable organisation. But what happened between 2000 and 2007? AIB became caught up, property speculation, inspired by greed. And two things happened in our industry: profit before staff, profit before customers. And that's just not an international phenomenon. There's a particular problem in relation to this bank manages affairs. From 2008 onwards, there were substantial losses in AIB in the Republic of Ireland. Last year's losses was something the order of 1.9 billion before impaired loans. But that was driven from a management team, most of which are the same board making this decision is going to impact on FTB, making decisions based on greed. And unfortunately, senior management in AIB at the centre have been in denial with discussions with the Irish government up to recently. And that's significant that that's taken on board. Indeed, the view 2 years ago was that the bank was not in any trouble whatsoever, were well capitalised, and over the then chief executive's dead body was any interference going to take place. Fortunately for him, he's not dead, but he's left. The bottom line from the point of view of the organisation, it's in a serious state. But the concern that we have is there's no consideration in relation to the impact of this decision on the Northern Ireland economy or on the staff that work in Northern Ireland. Now, what are they left with? They're left with a shortfall of 7.4 billion that needs to be bridged. That has been the result is that AIB has significant losses in impaired loans that have to be transferred to the National Asset Management Agency in the Republic of Ireland. The capital ratios are inadequate. Now, the Irish Exchequer has offered to acquire the shares to meet the shortfall. And indeed, the Irish government has gone on record to say that it will take a majority holding in AIB to save the bank. However, it would seem that the board of AIB wants to pursue a strategy that provides for a minority holding. And by having minority holding, they have decided to dispose of First Trust Bank, AIBGB, and Poland, and the operation in the United States. So from our point of view, I suppose, and from Northern Ireland's economy point of view, there hasn't been consideration of given. And we've seen this with other, for example, multinational banks. RBS is now 84% owned by the British government. It has retained Ulster Bank, for example, here on the island of Ireland. It's retained other operations, whereas AIB wants to contract in the Republic of Ireland and sell off without taking into consideration the impact on the Northern Ireland economy and the impact on staff that we represent. And analysts would tell us, and we're talking to analysts on a regular basis, that even if they sell the stake in Poland or indeed sell the stake in M&T, the probability even with the sale of the First Trust Bank operation, they still probably end up with majority shareholding. And I suppose the question that we're posing to the committee is in the context of Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland staff. If they're going to eventually end up, why would you sell it off in the first place? And if the decision is to sell it off, how can you help us in influencing that decision to best protect competition here in Northern Ireland, banking in Northern Ireland, customers in Northern Ireland, and in relation to the situation with regard to staff that we represent? Now, many questions are asked, who would buy and why would they buy? The loan book is estimated, and this is all guesstimate figures, something the order of $1 billion here in First Trust Bank. There could be consolidation with other banks operating in Northern Ireland. That's unlikely. There might be a competition issue there. Whether anybody in Northern Ireland operating will be interested in it is a debatable feast. It's less attractive than other offerings, likely, and at the moment, as you know, there's a lot of institutions up for sale and in the UK. We're looking at RBS branches, Lies, HBOS branches are there. From a strategic point of view, looking at a buyer, they probably will be more attractive than a small network that was depending on a big international bank that's now downsized very significantly. And again, I think there is obviously observations in relation to how strong is the Northern Ireland economy if somebody was to come in to buy it. And obviously, there is a view that it's slower to recover, remember, in relation to other areas. We've looked at the scenario of if a British or European owner comes in, what may happen? Our view would be, assuming British or European bank acquires the FTB loan book, there would be less sensitivity than Irish-based banks would have in relation to homeowners. We've done some evaluation in relation to repossessions. And if you look at repossessions here in Northern Ireland, particularly by the Irish banks, they haven't been the same level of repossessions, for example, than there is across the water. And there is a European trend in relation to that that's far higher than exists. So our concern would be somebody coming in with a head office in Munich or Frankfurt or London, maybe less sensitive in terms of the issue. And we all know in Northern Ireland, and looking at recent figures out yesterday for the UK in terms of retail price index, that people are being stressed in this economy. And homeowners particularly will be stressed into the future. So there will be a sensitivity in relation to we could be worse off in terms of a potential acquirer. And in terms of our members' terms and conditions and pensions, there is limited legislation that will give protection, particularly in the area of pensions. And what legislation is there in relation to TUPE? Our own experience is that can be changed very dramatically following it being acquired by somebody with either a British background or a European background. Also, it's no harm to suggest that there's little interest at the moment. If it is sold, it could be sold in relation to out of desperation, could be viewed as a fire sale. And although that may very well in the short term allow some capital go to AIB, it has no regard for staff or for customers here in Northern Ireland, and indeed the impact in relation to that. And our big fear, and there is a fear at the moment in relation to this, that there are carpetbaggers out there, investment companies, that may be just interested in assets and take the assets, take the lending book, and then plunder the situation with huge impact. And these messages need to be given to the board of AIB, who's been very minuscule in its strategy, just looking after the board of AIB, looking after a bank in the Republic of Ireland, and really shown total contempt, if I could suggest, to the staff and to the Northern Ireland economy. And we genuinely believe also, believe it or not, that it's a bad deal for AIB. We've argued at the recent AGM to the chairman and to the chief executive that as a strategy, they may be better off with a bigger state ownership and coming out of this as an international bank, than downsizing to a small bank in a very structured and very damaged economy over the next number of years, which have huge implications for other members of ours. And we genuinely see it as a bad deal for Northern Ireland. So in summary, I think what we're saying today is, first of all, thank you for the opportunity of bringing us here. It is a very significant development. I think you have enormous opportunity to influence and to be relevant to your own constituencies and people in your own areas where our members are interacting on a daily basis. We're not naive and we're not asking for the impossible. What we're saying is, whatever decision is made, it must take Northern Ireland into consideration. It must take the Northern Ireland economy into the situation. It must factor on Northern Ireland consumers, and it must look after Northern Ireland staff. And we're engaging with the bank in relation to how one can do that, whether you sell it or whether you buy it. But our concern is that these people haven't learned the lessons of the past. So thank you very much indeed, and we'll take any questions.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. You're very welcome. I know individual members have already met with some of you on this issue, and obviously, I mean, we as a committee would have a concern about people's jobs and house repossessions and everything else, but also in the general economy as well. I have David first for questions.
You are very welcome. I haven't met any of you before. You started off, first 75% of your presentation was, I thought, doing a very good sales pitch for First Trust. And I had written down, if it's as good as you say it is, then you'll have no problem getting a buyer. And then in the last bit, you put the sock on that one and talked about its loan book, and then said it was less attractive. And understand the reasons that you gave for being less attractive. And you then went over the sensitivities and the ideas about repossessions. I think from our point of view, anything that could lead to any jobs being lost, let alone 1,500, which is what you're saying, is something that we would want to try and protect. The difference that I see in this is that this is commercialism, and the decisions are being made outside Northern Ireland. And according to what you've said, these decisions have more or less been made, that there is a done deal. Therefore, from my own perspective, and from the Northern Ireland perspective as well, it is obviously an interest to see about the disposal, about the potential for that. I am conscious of what you say about a fire sale, in that that just could be on the back of, and I hope it wouldn't be, but it could just be on the back of, right, we can put this deal together in the Republic, now let's get rid of the rest. People have memories. All that you say about this group, it has not had the best of practices throughout its history. There have been cases up here of people moving banks because of that. What I wanted to try and, first of all, are there any NAMA consequences for First Trust? I was just giving you an outline there. I'm going to have a couple of questions now, if the Chairman is okay. Are there any NAMA consequences for First Trust?
Well, at this point in time, it's unclear. There will be some NAMA consequences down the line, I would have thought, that there would be some of the impairments that are there will have to be provided for. And under the legislation with NAMA, AIB's negotiations is based on acquisitions and property over 5 million being transferred into NAMA, regardless whether it's in Northern Ireland or in Great Britain.
Well, I'm just wondering, in the terms of perhaps a sale or a disposal, would AIB would they take the cover for the NAMA consequences from the sale of First Trust? It wouldn't appear to me to be a good idea to be selling something with NAMA consequences in it at the moment.
Well, I think that's going to be all part, that will be part of the negotiations that's going on. My own judgment on it is that anything that's NAMA earmarked will be AIB's responsibility and the Irish government's responsibility after the legislation goes through. But just to pick up on two other points before you ask the other question, don't underestimate the significant importance of your own group and indeed the Northern Ireland Assembly in relation to this. You mentioned the point, the decision has been made. You have to look at this in the round. First of all, the Irish government is going to end up with a significant share of AIB. So this is not a board in a normal commercial situation. If this was a normal commercial situation, this bank would be closed down, there'd be locks on the door, and we would have walked away from it.
And so would many other banks, to be fair.
But this is no different than any other. So we're not in a normal commercial situation. That's the first point. The second point is we're not here to say that AIB was the greatest bank in the world in Northern Ireland, because we work in the bank and would be aware of the difficulties you highlighted. What we're doing is what's best for the Northern Ireland economy, what's best for the Northern Ireland consumers, what's best for competition here in Northern Ireland, and indirectly what's best for our staff. And I genuinely feel that before this decision has to be made, it'll have to be endorsed by an AGM. In other words, shareholders will have to endorse this. So a lot can be done by putting pressure on the board to look and engage, not only in relation to the strategy that maybe they have arrived at but still haven't completed, but more importantly in terms of what the future implications of any strategy would be.
Okay, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Do you think that we need to hear from AIB and First Trust? Now, we're hearing from you, and that's great. But do we need to hear from the people who are actually involved in the disposal? Do we need to hear what their plans are, what their thoughts would be, and about the protection of jobs here in Northern Ireland, about the impact that could have on Northern Ireland? And are we likely to be told that's none of our business in the form that this bank may adopt its commercial interests? And whatever the case would be, how can you direct us to become involved, which is what I personally would like to see us perhaps involved in? And if not involved, certainly made aware of the sale or the disposal of the interests here in Northern Ireland, and the consequences of that. I don't think that, certainly politically, because it is commercial, and we're not, I can't see Her Majesty's government buying or taking shares in First Trust. But it slightly smacks a bit about the Presbyterian Mutual, in that there's something going on here that we don't exactly have our fingers on the pulse, and that's quite annoying in terms of, do we have any real power, do we not at times? But where do you see a committee like ours and an executive like ours getting underneath what's going on here in order to protect the jobs? Because that seems to me to be the crucial element. Now, what I also would, and you maybe can't answer it, is you say that the loan book's $1 billion, but I don't know how many customers that represents in Northern Ireland, and I don't know the extent of the lending. What is the bank telling its customers?
Well, there's a lot of...
If I was a customer, if I belonged to it,
Well,
I'd like to know what they're doing.
Well, the number of questions there. I mean, first of all, what you can do. I mean, it's like everything. You're elected and you're there as an influencer, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful that this decision was arrived at, where the staff weren't even consulted, and when nobody came here to Northern Ireland to talk even to the customers, never mind to the politicians, of the implication of this decision. I fully accept this is not a commercial entity. It's what political lobbying is all about, and we genuinely believe you will make a difference. Ultimately, the board will make whatever decision they decide to make, but with influence from this committee will certainly allow a better debate and transparency in relation to rather just selling it off as a fire sale or whatever they want to do with it, without factoring in that there's jobs, families, customers and an economy in here in Northern Ireland that can't be disregarded, given that this has come out of total mismanagement, and the fact of the matter, we're in this place because the Irish government and the taxpayer in the Republic of Ireland is bailing the bank out. And I suppose what this is extending to, in bailing the bank out, how and what is it right that the Northern Ireland economy could lose out, and that staff in Northern Ireland will lose out their jobs? The second point is, in terms of any potential buyer, if a potential buyer is aware the politicians here in Northern Ireland are concerned and are interested in jobs, that will factor into a buyer's proposition. Where if there's kind of a muted silence in relation to this, a buyer will see this for what it is, will buy it, and will asset strip it. So this is about putting in place a constructive approach, and it may very well encourage an actual buyer to really have a real interest in investing in this. And we've had this conversation with the Minister for Finance here in Northern Ireland about if there are real people interested, we can encourage and develop that. So I think there's a lot of issues there. In relation to lending and customers, that's sensitive information, and I'm not in the position to share that with you. On the question, should the bank be asked to come in here? Of course they should. The bank should have briefed Northern Ireland key people before this decision was made, as well as the customers. And in terms of the customers, what's been told to the customers at the moment is FTB is up for sale. And I think genuinely our staff is in this dilemma, that we're in a bank that is actually seriously short of funds. There is very little lending going on at this point in time. And if this is not addressed, factoring in the points that I've made, I think we're creating an inevitability about this bank going out of business on a very gradual, slow basis, which is what we don't want to see happening here. We want to see this bank, whatever the decision is, whether it stays or whether it goes, to be in a position where we can try and save the minister.
Okay, that's very helpful. Just finally, on a timescale, you've told us what's likely to happen. Can see his likelihood in that. You've told us about the difficulties that there'll be, sensitive market, etc. But what you're saying is there is a clear intention to dispose of whatever they have in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. Because the government and the Republic is involved in this, are you saying that they are likely to, as majority shareholders, or shareholders anyhow, exert pressure to dispose of the assets in Northern Ireland quickly, to get rid of them? Or is it too soon that you can say, look, this is going to take 6 months, 18 months, or whatever? Or do we factor in the contingency anticipation that once it starts to roll, it'll roll like hell and it'll go very, very quickly?
Well, first of all, the Irish government has said that they are prepared up to put in 70% of the ownership if it's required. The board has made a decision to dispose, to minimise the government involvement. If you were to ask me what the Irish government would be thinking would be, if this other crowd can raise capital from somewhere else, we do not want to put taxpayers' money into this bank. But they are influencers in the sense that, one of the things that the Irish government are talking to us, for example, in the Republic of Ireland, is about job retention. And you just have to listen today, another 750 jobs gone now, more jobs gone. So I think there is an influence from a political perspective in terms of decision-making that's there. We're not naive or not commercial people. We deal in the real world. But this can be achieved, but with looking at what's best for Northern Ireland and what's best for staff and what's best for customers. And I believe it needs political influence to influence those decisions, as well as direct influence to the board of AIB, of which there are people here in Northern Ireland who are on the AIB UK board, on that board. That's the strategy. And in terms of timescale, this will be done and dusted, in my view, by the end of the year. I'm sure as we're talking today, there is a perspective out there where they have appointed people to look at the sale of this. So I think time is of the essence, from our point of view, to make those noises in terms of what's best in terms of your strategy, what impact it will have, and how we can best come to an overall arrangement in relation to that, in the best interest of the Northern Ireland economy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, David. Declan?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Could I also extend a welcome to you? I think it's very good that you're here with us. You've addressed to some degree most of the issues that I was coming to, both in your introduction and also in answer to David's question, but can I ask you just a few more points in relation to those? Yeah, you talked about the possibilities of it being bought by a local competitor or the parent of a local competitor and consolidation of the sector. What protections are there against that happening to an undue degree? Because we don't already have a huge amount of competition in the marketplace here. And I think I would have real fears if that level of competition were to be reduced further. So what are the actual protections there against that?
Well, there is protection under the EU in relation to the issue of consolidation, and if an existing bank here decides to buy AIB. I think the problem with this is that in the context of the UK, it will be viewed in a UK perspective as not necessarily in a Northern Ireland perspective. And we're getting advice ourselves in terms of how best to deal with this. So, for example, if Santander was to be in the place where it might be interested, they would own a number of subsidiary companies here in Northern Ireland. If they were to take it over, you'd have to ask yourself commercially, would you run an alliance in Leicester, Bradford and Lingley, Abbey National, and would you then run a First Trust Bank network in there? The likelihood is the answer is no. And I suppose going back to the role of the Northern Ireland economy, we would be arguing strongly at the EU level that you cannot look at this in the context of a UK economy, you have to look at it in the context of Northern Ireland. I wouldn't be holding my breath in relation to that, to be quite honest with you, but that's some of the factors that are there. So the view would be, in terms of the consolidation, it could very well be feasible that some existing potential buyer could come from somebody within here in Northern Ireland. And from a competitions point of view, they may successfully argue that it's not anti-competitive practice on the basis that it's a UK market. So that would be a risk. The other one we've looked at, somebody coming in that hasn't got a traditional understanding of roots here in Northern Ireland, or indeed in the UK as a whole. Our experience of that has been that what tends to happen in those kind of situations is you may look at retaining in the short term a branch network, branding it as a local brand, but then taking out head office activity and support. That would have a significant impact on to about 500 jobs at least for the very start. And then you'd look at a situation in relation to then building up that brand. So that might be your second option. And then the worst option of all is, as I said, a hedge fund or somebody coming in here that actually sees there's a potential value here, but there's no real market here, and let's asset strip the organisation. And that's the worst case scenario for all of us, for the economy, for the staff, and that kind of. So there's some of the scenarios that I hope clarifies it, Mr.
Yeah, I think those points are very useful and important. Could I suggest to you that really it's not in AIB's interests to do a fire sale?
It's not in AIB's interest to do a fire sale. Probably isn't. The problem I think we're faced with is this, that they have committed to do this on the back of selling the 4 institutions. AIB has committed to sell Poland, M&T, GB and FTB. So in the context of maybe somebody coming in relation to that, you may very well take the point that it probably isn't their interest, but this is not kind of a real world situation. Their view may very well be that in terms of First Trust Bank, we're better off rid of them for a small amount of money if the other 2 or 3 are being sold, and then go back and look at the brand that's there, rather than have the situation that we continue to invest here in Northern Ireland for whatever reason. When we would have thought that part of the debate around the table at board level was, are we not better holding on to an international kind of operation, albeit downsizing it and restructuring it with a presence in GB or a presence in Northern Ireland as part of a strategic view? I'd hope you're right that it's not in their interest, but in this kind of high level of finance, you just don't know the answer. And certainly we're not encouraged. We're not hearing an awful lot that says if we don't get the right price, we're going to hold on to this fine institution and invest for it in the future. I mean, the experience would be in the last 2 years, the amount of investment that AIB is putting into Northern Ireland is slim, to be quite honest with you, and that gives an indication they're looking to offload it.
I certainly think we need to be saying to the bank that they have a wider interest other than their commercial interest, and that after the collapse and the rescue of the banks in recent times, absolutely. I mean, that point ought to be very well understood by the banks. Could I ask you about the view of the Republic government? And David did touch on this point really regarding the strategic positioning of the bank, whether they're already a significant minority shareholder. So in terms of this decision to sell, have they already taken a view on whether it's better to gain some income through sale and reducing to becoming a smaller bank, or it would be better that they maintain their size and the government become a bigger shareholder. Surely the government isn't just sitting back and letting the rest of the members of the board make the call on that.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, it's difficult to evaluate what the Minister for Finance and the government's view on it. It would appear to be that they see themselves as custodians of taxpayers' money. So the least taxpayers' money they can invest in a bank like AIB would seem to me to be where they're coming from. And I think the board maybe are picking up on those signals and saying, well, look, we'll sell off the profitable parts and we'll keep a non-profitable part. I just don't know the answer to that question. We are also lobbying the government, as you can appreciate, in the Republic of Ireland on this same issue, because we would argue on the point that you've picked up on, that from a commercial point of view, as a long-term investment, you're better off retaining a presence that's broader than just a very small bank in a very small economy, which is very challenged. The debate that's going on, and it goes back to the figure I showed you, 7.4 billion is the gap that has to be filled. But the government, the minister did say on the famous 30th of March presentation to the Dáil, he did make the point that the government will not allow AIB to close down. They will put 70% ownership if that's what it takes. So I would probably agree with you in the sense that I don't think the government is taking what I call a hands-on attitude. It seems to be taking a view. We have a minority shareholding. We have two public interest people that are there. But ultimately, going back to David's question, it's a commercial decision. And if we invest less in the political climate in the Republic of Ireland, I'd say the judgment is we're better off in that situation than actually putting 70% in. That seems to be where government is at the moment. But we are working hard with them to try and challenge that and have that greater discussion. And that's why I think Northern Ireland politicians have a key role in, at least in this sense. It allows for better debate and discussion and transparency around this. And if there is a strategic plan there that we can all understand, at least it puts it out in the open. But that's not what's there at the moment.
Finally, can I ask you, is there a potential for benefit here in the following sense, that if a new player was introduced to the marketplace and introduced to Northern Ireland who hadn't been here before, and then got to know that Northern Ireland scene and had the capacity then to build on the base that they had here and clearly move outside this very small geographical and financial area, is that not something we might look at with interest?
Absolutely. I mean, we've no vested interest coming in here in terms of solutions. That one solution is better than any other solution. What we're looking at is a solution that's good for the Northern Ireland economy, it's good for consumers, good for competition, and good for staff. So this is why I think it's extremely important. Don't underestimate your own ability in terms of supporting staff and supporting the economy, the influence you will have on a potential buyer. And as we said to other politicians that we've met, and we've met the Minister, and we said this to the Minister, we have no particular solution as long as the solution tries to address those key objectives. And that's why I think we're working all together on this. I think there's a common agenda here. It's the Northern Ireland economy, a competition in the marketplace, and the best protection of jobs. And just to say, we're very realistic to know one way or the other, there will be job reductions. But we know there's going to have to be job reductions in some shape or fashion. But they can be done on a voluntary basis and an agreed basis. We're not, unrealistic. Our ask isn't things don't change. That's the inevitability of banking. Our members have faced huge change and are prepared to face more, but on the basis of a plan that's in the best interest of everybody. And again, I think what our members feel very angry about in Northern Ireland, that we're not the cause of the problem. We have been reasonably sound and a prudent bank. We are reasonably profitable in the overall cause, and we're now going to be the biggest sacrificers. And as sacrifices and staff, the Northern Ireland economy will sacrifice as well.
I think you're being very constructive in how you're presenting the case now.
Thank you.
Okay, Duncan. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I guess it's been very, very useful. And like Declan, I think that your attitude to it is quite helpful too, because it is dosed in doubt and realism. Sometimes you think we can approach these sort of subjects and wanting everything to remain the same, accepting the reality. In some ways, it doesn't matter to me, and it doesn't matter probably to the vast majority of the people of Northern Ireland who owns First Trust Bank. And as you said yourself, change happens, mergers, sales, and even in recent times closures of major banking institutions. That happens. You pointed out yourself that First Trust Bank was itself came as a result of a merger between two old banks, and so that sort of thing happens. So it doesn't matter to me who owns it, doesn't matter to the vast majority of people who owns the bank. What does matter to, or should matter to all of us, is the economy, is jobs, and is particularly competition, which I think there's a distinct lack of. Something that this committee and other committees in this building has taken an interest in the past. I think what we see here as well is a problem that emanates from having no locally owned bank in Northern Ireland. Have all of our banks, our four major banks, are owned now by interests outside of Northern Ireland. So we're very much at the mercy of decisions taken in boardrooms outside of this jurisdiction. And now with governments having a major say, governments outside of Northern Ireland are taking decisions. And I would suggest that the Republic of Ireland government are probably relaxed at best, and at worst no interest at all in who owns the First Trust Bank, and probably less interest in the impact that it might have on our economy. I would dare say they have a few problems of their own at this minute in time that are occupying them. From a wider perspective, I mean, what you've suggested, your evidence is that this would appear to be something that is uniquely AIB, this approach. From your experience of the market in the south, and Bank of Ireland are a major player here too. Can you see this type of approach? In many ways, AIB and IBOA are structured similarly. They are predominantly based in the Republic of Ireland. They have major interests in Northern Ireland, but they've also had growing interests in GB as well. So they're both very similar. Is this an approach that's being taken almost exclusively and uniquely by the AIB board, or do you see this sort of catching on? Are there any evidence of it catching on? Is it a fear that you have that BOI could do exactly the same? And then that puts us in a...
Okay, well, my colleague will respond to that, but I just say this to you. Again, we are having similar discussions, believe it or not, with Bank of Ireland. They haven't concluded yet. But if I could say this in terms of my own confidence, is that in the context of the EU restructuring plan that may very well be concluded by another competitor bank, I think it's unlikely that we'll see either sell-off or full closure of that competitor bank in Northern Ireland. And I also see a potential whereby they'll still retain a presence in GB. So I think why this is a bit unique, it seems to be driven by an AIB board looking at a very short-term view of what's best for AIB in the Republic of Ireland, with huge consequences in terms of Northern Ireland. And you are right. I mean, we're very practical. I mean, as a trade union and as in this industry for 25 years, personally speaking, we've come through radical change. Northern Bank, for example, was part of the National Australia Bank. We were involved in the migration of that bank into Danske Bank here, and who now own it and puts it in a different situation. You rightly identified the scenario in relation to AIB was previously TSB. So we have a lot of experience in these situations. We don't see this as being a one-dimensional solution. But what our success in the past, and my colleague would pick up on this, is that in the past, for example, when TSB was taken over by AIB, we did a huge amount of lobbying at that time. And at that time, that made a difference. It made a difference because I'm sure if AIB thought they could get away with TSB by closing down branches and, restructuring and consolidation, they would have done it that way. But they decided, they would tell us now in the best interest of the staff and the customers, to do it a different way. So I think from our point of view, this is strategically important for yourselves. And as a new assembly, and as politicians now becoming directly active in the situation, it does give you an opportunity, and also puts down a wider message to maybe somebody like Abbey or Santander or somebody else in the British government who maybe owns some of these institutions. You need to consult with us here in Northern Ireland on these issues. Not that you'd have any, as I would say, and I think David's question was, commercial decision making, but you will be influencers in terms of the output. And that's the ask of the staff for you as politicians. We will deal with the terms and conditions issues and all of that in a structured way as we will do. That's our tools of trade. But you can influence that. And if you influence that in a particular direction, I think you're doing our members a service and your constituents a service in their... Robin, you want to pick up on that?
I'll just pick up on that point, Larry. Thanks. In terms of where political influence can be brought to bear, because 20 years ago, the TSB group took a commercial decision to close the Belfast head office in Queen Square in Belfast and move all the head office functions to Manchester as part of their divisional strategy. And at that time, we immediately engaged with the Northern Ireland politicians, and we got great support across the board. And an all-party delegation went to the chairman of the board of TSB and gave very strong messages that they needn't think that they can take jobs out of Northern Ireland and still benefit from the Northern Ireland economy and benefit from the Northern Ireland customers. And that decision was reversed. And one of the things, I suppose, that emerged from that was the IBOA were told, and all the staff were told, the core strength of the organisation that now has an interest in Northern Ireland is an international bank with diversified income streams, diversified exposure to risk across different geographies, and diversification across the different currencies within which they operate. And all of a sudden, after 20 years of that being embedded in every discussion Larry would have had with the various chief executives, that's the bedrock of the organisation that employs 1,500 people in Northern Ireland. And now, in a few short months, because of fundamental decisions that were taken to the detriment of AIB and everybody who works in it in the last number of years, is now totally spun on its head, where they're going to crawl into the 26 counties and leave people then in Northern Ireland and in GB up to potentially the highest bidder. And that's against, as Larry has said, against everybody's interests from where we're sitting. I think that's the sort of the key in terms of where they had taken. In fact, I remember it got fed back to us from the sister union in GB that at the time the chairman of TSB said that he had never in his career had a cross-party delegation coming to London to make a case for jobs, and the last place on the planet he expected to get it from was Northern Ireland, but we achieved it. And they went and put their shoulders to the wheel to protect Northern Ireland jobs for Northern Ireland people. So whilst a lot in the world has changed over the last 20 years, there are still some fundamentals that the organisation owes a loyalty not just to the staff who've delivered for them over the years, but from the communities that they've extracted profit from. Because as Larry has said, there's been a lot of profit generated in the Northern Ireland and GB economies that ultimately have gone to the international parent domiciled in Dublin. I think that's something where we don't want in any way to leave any stone unturned, where we can bring in different sort of influence, given the fact that the position in AIB is very political at this juncture. You only have to look at the appointment of the recent chief executive. It took a long period of time. It's well documented in the press about the standoff between the government and the board of the bank. So, just to add to what Larry said.
That's fine. Chair, I think that there is acknowledging the limitations of our power, I think there is certainly a role for this committee and others within the Assembly to play in trying to do what we can to ensure that the worst case scenario doesn't unfold. I think there is it's nearly incumbent upon us, even though there's a lot of concentration, understandably, today on negative aspects of this, even to try to highlight the positives of, not even just First Trust Bank, but the Northern Ireland market. And I agree with Declan, there are certain scenarios which could unfold here, which would be to the benefit of the Northern Ireland economy. It may have a detrimental impact on some of your members and staff and all, and we understand, but realistic about that. But there are scenarios that could unfold where you could have major global banking operators who are of a small existing presence here, who could strike out, who could give others within the sector here in Northern Ireland the kick up the backside that they've needed for a long time, and could actually even then move into a situation where they expand into the Republic of Ireland. So, but they are doing.
You've got the pessimistic hat on today.
Well, we could do it. We could do it all the support we could in the Republic of Ireland at the moment. Simon.
You're getting your checkbook out then, eh?
I think we would club together and see what we can do.
Okay. Is that you, Simon?
That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Mitchell?
I'm very interested in in Simon's plans to recolonise the. But I mean, I do actually support the context in which he has presented that very interesting scenario. It was very, very welcome. I've met you before, and I'm very supportive of the case that you're developing. I think just in respect of not underestimating their influence, it's also important not to overestimate, because Simon made reference there. I'm sure you noted that these aren't devolved matters.
Sure.
So, I mean, we're not in a position to even to command the banks to appear here, and it does actually take a significant amount of political pressure to bring about those engagements, and they're not always satisfactory engagements either in terms of trying to extract straight answers to straight questions. I'm assuming that you do intend to lobby the new government in London, and that you're already in contact with the Dublin government. The issue for me, in terms of your very interesting presentation, and I do think that you've been very realistic about the pressures and the consequences, and the fact that you'll not be able to save all of the jobs. The question at the end of the day is there some way of challenging the intention of the board? And what they're trying to offset is the loss of power at board level if the government steps in with money and obviously their own management and development perspectives. And what in fact is the net benefit to their intention of disposing of First Trust? You know, is there something that we can examine there with yourselves to affect that particular strategic trajectory that the board have set? Because it seems to me that you know, we cannot rule out the possibility of this just being simply you know, offloading. But the question arises, like, does offloading in any way benefit the board in terms of their intentions? You know, would a 70% input by the government, which the government doesn't want to do, right, if they can avoid it, is going to be reduced to a 69% input as a result of just kind of dumping of the assets here? And have you explored that consideration? And is it, in terms of influencing the discussion and hopefully defining a role for ourselves and influencing these considerations, that seems to me to be the point of vulnerability. But what the board would rationalise is the reason for this disposal, and what would be the real kind of benefits. Now, not in terms of the jobs that are lost, they don't care, it seems, but in terms of avoiding being completely dominated by the government appointees.
Well, I know my colleague would pick up on
There's
some
going
of
to
those.
be anyway, it seems to me.
I know Steve, my colleague, wants to pick up on some of those points, but could I just say three things? First of all, I would be realistic. If you call AIB before this committee, you'll probably get a very benign letter back acknowledging and recognising how important.
And they might even respond by saying the PRO will just kind of play the reins of bogey with the whole discussion.
You know, I mean, I think these committees have a value, and for them to work, people have to participate. And that's what democracy is about, and that's a legislative issue. How do you try and create, in terms of, you know, groups that do participate? Because I think it has a value. I suppose what we're saying to you clearly, we're setting out our stall here. I think you strategically as a group, in terms of the Northern Ireland Assembly, has to best decide how to prosecute that. The work we did before in the past wasn't necessarily prosecuted in the headlines of the Belfast Telegraph or the newsletter, or indeed the Irish News, to the best effect. It was done in a structured way that hurt and was direct to the people that have influence. So, I mean, I'd be guiding the committee in terms of the importance of a cross-party representation that can have impact, and coming to a committee, although we would value it, sometimes is not necessarily the way to go in relation to this. That's the first thing. The second thing, I wouldn't underestimate the Irish government's commitment to Northern Ireland. And if politicians here in Northern Ireland, a message was given to the Irish government that has a share, I think they will be taken on board. But it's no good me doing it in terms of somebody that
I
represents.
do want to come to that.
Yeah, so
Could you explain
and I'm going to
what
come
you've
back to you.
done so far with the Irish government
Yes.
and what you intend to do with the
Yeah,
British
well,
government?
and I'll come back to that in a second. Just on the third question, in relation to this strategy, I think you're right. What we're together is putting together a kind of a business case to the board of AIB, and we're in the process of doing that to try and challenge the argument that disposing FTB on the back of other disposals will actually bring the value that they're talking about without impacting on that. So we're working on some of that, and we will be prepared to share that with you in terms of that. In terms of the Irish government, we've commenced a dialogue with them in the process of discussing that. How far that has advanced is other than those discussions beginning to commence now. They haven't advanced very further because there's been other impediments in the way, as you can appreciate, elsewhere out there. So I think from our point of view, we're committed to doing that. But we think we will get a good hearing. But I think we need other people to, have a similar agenda, but a different agenda from a Northern Ireland perspective that will influence it. I don't know whether my colleague wants to.
No, I think, obviously, I can't speak for the AIB Group Board and why they came to the decision they did, but, if you're looking at it, to keep the Irish government stake in the AIB Group below 50%, there's probably a driver behind it. And for what reason is hard to tell. And if you look at the wider business case, because it doesn't make sense to dispose of profitable parts of the group in terms of the GB operations and the First Trust operations to retrench into an unprofitable part of the group. And I think from an Irish government perspective, if you're looking for a return at some point on their stake in the bank and to extract themselves from that, it doesn't make sense either. And I think that's the message and the engagement we have to have with the Irish government. And I think the good example of that is if we look at RBS and 24 billion of a loss in 2008, 84% owned by the British government. That hasn't stopped RBS turning themselves around. It hasn't stopped RBS maintaining Ulster Bank in Northern Ireland and in the Republic and turning that bank round. And the Exchequer, the British Exchequer, is receiving the benefit from that. And RBS will be able to extract themselves from that 84% at some point in the future. So there's lessons to be learnt there, which I don't think are being looked at in enough detail around a business direction from AIB Group and indeed the Irish government. And that's the engagement we have to make those points. The business strategy, the business case, and what's happening now is not in the best interests of the group, and it's certainly not in the best interests of First Trust Bank or indeed of the GB operation.
Well, I mean, just to return then to this question of influence, I mean, we have a committee that obviously shadows and examines the operation function and the role of the finance department and minister. It seems to me, on the basis of what we're hearing you present today, these are issues at the end of the day that will be dealt with as reserved matters by the respective governments. They don't fall to any individual committee or indeed to this executive. But there would be a value, I think, in this committee supporting the idea of an engagement between yourselves and, for instance, First and Deputy First Minister, the Finance Minister and the Enterprise Minister, with a view to getting an agreed executive position to be represented in both governments. That's probably the best thing that we could do to reflect. I mean, there's a direct kind of local rationale for expecting that support, which is 1,500 jobs and 48 branches of a profitable banking operation and financial services operation here in this economy. And I think that would be it would be a matter for the committee, but I think that's actually possibly the best response we could give to the presentation that you've made today. And it would give you the opportunity to engage at that government level in conjunction with what you're planning to do already.
That'd be very positive. I'd very much welcome that, and so would the staff and I think their families.
Okay.
Okay, Jonathan.
Thank you, Steve and Laurie. Very interesting in what you had to say there about the fire sale aspect of all of this. And whilst I'll put my cynical head on here and being honest with you, what you're saying is absolutely right. You know, it doesn't make sense to actually sell this off unless I put on the finance minister's head in the Republic of Ireland and look at it and go, I don't want to be bailing out with public money another penny of this bank. And I want you to be honest on this score, Larry. I personally don't see the Irish Republic government wanting to stop this sale. Do you?
Well, I think, and I'm always honest, so the answer is I don't know what the government's view would be. I can put a business hat on and say, why would you put more taxpayers' money into this bank if AIB can raise X billion and reduce the taxpayers' view? But politicians, as you know, are not necessarily influenced by business decisions. They're also political animals. And I think in the context of this, and particularly with the very strong relationship between the Irish government and indeed the Northern Ireland Assembly, I think if there was a business case that could look at this in a different way, and the reason I say this is this, the $4.5 billion is not going to be raised by the sale of FTB. The likelihood is most of the share of that is going to be secured through Poland, the M&T, which by the way are today in acquisition talks with Santander Bank. So the value of that is even growing as we speak. And probably the GB part of the business is a possibility, and that's what analysts would say to you. So I think there could very well be a case in the context of what you would get for 3 parts or even 2 parts of that business, how then you would respond to that as an Irish government. And if the difference was $500 million that retains a bank in Northern Ireland, there may be an attractiveness in relation to that for the international strategic decisions I talked about, access to the UK market or whatever. So I don't think it's as black and white as it would appear. And that's what makes this a bit unique. It isn't black and white. It's a changing set of circumstances. And I suppose bottom line what we're saying to the committee is that, look, we're realistic. And if you take your scenario to its conclusion and the Irish government says no, well, that doesn't mean we all go away and to close down our hats. And I think as Simon was saying, and Declan, and indeed Mitchell and David were making the point, that this is about you as an assembly saying, well, okay, if that's where you're at, that's your decision commercially, but how are you through that transition, or how are you as coming in here as a new bank? What are you going to do for the Irish, for the Northern Ireland economy? And in the context of that, how can you support the union in trying to protect jobs? So I think it's a multifaceted approach that I would say. You know.
Well, Laurie, you're getting to the position which I really wanted to get you to. You know, if the decision is ultimately allowed to go ahead with regard to the fire sale, now should that include or exclude AIB Northern Ireland? That you're right. There is politics that can be played out with regard to that. Can I, you know, I'm being absolutely cynical here, and I'm being honest with you. Do I see it in the best interests of AIB Northern Ireland to remain within a banking institute which then would have very few means of actually recovering outside of public money? Or would it be better us influencing who actually purchase them and the reasons why they purchase them to create a stronger bank in Northern Ireland?
Well, I thought first when I answered the question, you were going to say to me that I sounded like a politician. So I'm glad you didn't say that. What we're coming here with a multifaceted approach, Jonathan. Like we're not saying that there's one solution. All we're interested in, I set it out in 4 levels. What's best for the Northern Ireland economy? What's best for competition here in the banking industry? What's best for customers? And obviously our priority is what's best for staff. We're absolutely realistic and professional enough to know, and we're having meetings. We're in a big meeting in Belfast tomorrow. We had a meeting last night in Uri. We're in Limavady and Omagh in the next couple of weeks. We're saying this to our members to be realistic in relation to this. As other members have said, this is a very bad time for anybody in banking. There is going to be job reductions. There is going to be a substantial change in terms and conditions of employment. What we want to try and do, regardless of the strategy, is to influence it as best we can, to protect as many jobs and protect as part of that. And where you as politicians would be far more focused, I suppose, on 3 other elements of it, as well as job protection, the economy, competition, and that. We don't mind because we're in the same place. We're realistic. But it is a moving target. We're fortunate in the sense no decisions have been made yet, intentions of decisions. So time is of the essence in terms of influence. And I'm convinced that in terms of your own kind of assessment, that if that was to be the place, that in itself would be very positive, because for a potential investor, it puts AIB board on notice, and it puts a potential investor on notice that there are certain things that has to be done, and there are certain standards that have to be lived up to, as well as having to deal with us as a trade union. Just for the benefit of the committee to say, the risk for us of being acquired is that in relation to present pension benefits that people have in FTB, they're not protected by TUPE. So there'll be serious impact in relation to that. In relation to good terms and conditions, TUPE gives limited protection in terms of some of the... So it's, you know, in terms of individual terms and conditions, it's a worst case scenario. And you're right in terms of investment and in terms of AIB's lack of investment, I suppose, in Northern Ireland and in First Trust Bank over the last couple of years. But from the point of view of staff terms and conditions, it probably best protects them in the context of retaining. But is that only another short term? We don't know. So I think in terms of our approach is multifaceted. We're looking at it to try and put influence at EU level. We're going to the EU, for example, in 2 weeks' time to talk to the EU Commissioner about the Northern Ireland economy, going back to the earlier question that I think Declan asked about competition. To go to the Northern Ireland economy, to talk about the Northern Ireland economy and competition in Northern Ireland, and to pick up on Simon's point about if this can bring in better competition, everybody wins. You know, the customers win, the community will win, and it will put a marker down. So we have a multifaceted approach, but I think the points that Mitchell and others have made, it's a key time. And if you could get to the stage where it's been brought to the attention at First Minister and Deputy First, that is a powerful statement in terms of giving us the ability to influence. And I suppose that's all we want to do. Thanks.
Okay, Jonathan.
I think it's absolutely right, Chair. Now's the time to influence what happens here. But ultimately we need to be rather careful about the approach that is taken, because my gut feeling is the larger part will go off on a fire sale. So we've got to look at the best interests of Northern Ireland with regard to what happens after that.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's all the questions people have asked, but can I just say, just to sum up, I mean, your presentation was very, very good. I think protecting people's jobs, you automatically have to do that to protect the economy anyway. So, I mean, one goes in tandem with the other. I think in terms of the committee, you asked in your paper to do two separate things, and that was for us to write to the AIB board, but also to write to the Minister of Finance in the South. But I have to say, listening to what members have said, I think there could be another step taken there in terms of approaching First and Deputy First Minister to have some sort of representation at both governments, the British government and the government in the South as well, the Irish government. So I think that really, you know, if we will discuss that and take a view on that and hopefully agree on that way forward. But ultimately, I mean, obviously people's jobs and need to be protected, people's families and everything else, so particularly in this economic climate. So
well, can I just say, Chair, on behalf of the 1,500 staff and their families, thank you very much indeed. This is an honour, and it's democracy working as democracy should. I think we'll be reporting back to our members of the very positive response we've got from yourselves, and hopefully you'll be able to in a position to communicate the direction that's there, which I think we would be broadly supportive of. I think it would be very helpful, and we'll keep you advised as we do our own engagements to try and assist in whatever way we can to have the right outcome for staff, for customers and for the Northern Ireland economy. So thank you very much indeed.
thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So can we just agree then that we take those 3 steps?
Could I just